Welcome back. We're back. What is this, week 4, I think?
Nice.
4.
We're making progress.
That's a whole month. We're really going at it. I'm your host, Preston Moore. I'm joined by my co-host, Raymond Venuya, as always. Welcome back to Post Credit. We are excited to have you today. Last week, we talked all about Spider-Man. We talked about Spider-Man Far From Home, and then we talked about every other Spider-Man and even Venom a little bit. We talked all about Spider-Man, and nothing really happened since then in cinema. So we decided that this week would be a good week to, fresh off Far From Home, to but to rank the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. So this episode is just going to be us going back and forth ranking all 23 movies that Marvel Studios has produced since 2008 at the beginning with Iron Man. So, that being said, is there anything you want to say before we get started, Raymond?
Be prepared for some flaming hot takes over here, because I know already we're going to have some disagreements once we get to the top 10.
I think we might as well. So, the one thing I want to say before we get started, as it is a movie podcast, I feel like I should talk about the new movie that I saw this week. I saw Stuber with Dave Bautista and Kumail Nanjiani. And if I were to, since I don't have a whole lot of time to talk about it, I'm just going to say it wasn't very good. Oh. I would not recommend it. That's all I'll say about it.
Man.
If you want to know more about it, anybody that's listening, or Raymond, if y'all want to talk to me about it, hit me up. It's not a very good movie. That being said, let's get started with our entire MCU. So, I'll have you go first, Raymond. Starting at number 23, what is your 23rd best movie in the MCU?
Well, that's one way to put it. The 23rd best out of 23. But
well, they're all so good. I mean, well, they're not all so good, but
that was like the last.
None of them are
debatable.
None of them are downright terrible. I'll say that.
None of them are
I don't think
fantastic. So you know what?
Yeah,
that's
nothing.
Something.
Marvel's never reached that low. So we'll say 23rd best.
All right, my 23rd best is Thor: The Dark World. I mean, there's not really much to say about it. I mean, yeah, I can't really enjoy this movie. I mean, from Natalie Portman's character, I really feel bad for her because she's such a talented actress and she got put into that role. And with the villain, it just kind of happens. Like, it's really one of those movies where you kind of get to the end and it's just like, that kind of just happened. And nothing actually happened at all. But I think the most redeeming part of the movie is the post-credit scene when they bring the Infinity Stone to the Collector. Because it's like, oh, okay, it ties in later. But to be fair, yeah, it's nowhere. And even though it's the 23rd best, it's nowhere near Fan4stick.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So my 23rd on the list is The Incredible Hulk, which a lot of people think it's just like not even a part of Marvel because of the whole recasting thing, and like the only character from that movie that ever showed up in a later movie was General Ross.
Yeah.
So like a lot of people don't even care about it at all. Personally, it was the only Marvel movie I hadn't watched until I did a big rewatch of all of them before Infinity War came out. So that's where I'm basing most of my rankings, because I've seen them in the past like year. But Incredible Hulk is my last one. I think the CGI is bad, whereas like the CGI CGI and the special effects in like Iron Man, which came out that exact same year, that still holds up. Yeah, Incredible Hulk CGI does not at all. I think the acting is pretty bad too, and Abomination as the villain is not good either. One thing that I would have liked to see that I have not seen in a movie, because this is the only Hulk film I've seen. I know they made, like, there was one in 2003 or something.
With Eric Bana,
I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. I haven't watched any of them. The only Hulk movie based on Hulk that I've seen is this one. So I would be really interested to see like the Hulk's origin, like how he gets involved with the gamma rays and his experiments, and then he becomes the Hulk, like for the first time. I would really like to see that, but in this movie, they show that through a montage just real quick,
Yeah.
and you don't really get to see that progression. You see it happen in a montage, and then when it jumps into the story, he's like been the Hulk for a while now, and trying to keep himself secret. And I was like, what the heck? Because that's a cool thing. That's a cool thing. That's a really cool origin story as far as origins go, I feel like.
No, yeah, I feel like they definitely missed out on that. And I felt like that's why, too, it was kind of weird when I rewatched through the MCU to get to Infinity War. That's why I kind of forgot that this was part of the MCU, because it didn't even feel like it. But then...
Yeah.
Because I felt like, oh, was this just a sequel to the Eric Bana one? I was kind of confused on that one. But because that one you do get the origin, and even though I don't think that movie's it's not really good either, at least it was nice to see the origin and to see him go through that mental, I guess, challenge to be from, being this normal scientist to becoming this green rage monster. I thought it was at least interesting to see, and it made the movie worth watching for the most part, at least. But
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for me, my number 22 is actually the Incredible Hulk.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
feeding right into it.
So it was perfect.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, cool. You've said most of the things that there are to say about the movie. I mean, yeah, the acting isn't the greatest, and that's not a knock on Edward Norton Jr. either, because I know he's a good actor. It's just, hey, sometimes we just don't strike, But
yeah,
the CGI it's crazy to think that came out the same year as Iron Man, and that the Abomination
when
looked
Iron
like
Man
that.
is still, Abomination looked bad. There are some scenes in which Hulk looks pretty good, but for the most part, I don't think he looks very good. Some scenes, it's like, okay, yeah, that was dope, but like Abomination just looks terrible. He looks like an Abomination.
Yeah, I mean that came straight out of a PS2, so. I don't know what happened there.
Maybe that's what they wanted. They wanted Abomination to look like an abomination.
And
that fits.
What is your number 22?
My number 22 is Thor 1. I'll talk a little bit more about this whenever I get to Thor 2 on my rankings, but I think they're really close. They both go for the same Shakespearean take on Thor, where super dramatic and very, I don't have the right words to describe it. You know what I'm saying, though?
Yes.
It's very Shakespearean drama is what it feels like, I feel like. And I think it just doesn't work. I don't think, most people don't think it works, obviously, but I think it really doesn't work in the first Thor. I think the CGI is downright awful. I think the CGI is worse than in
The Incredible Hulk.
The Hulk. Yeah, but even then, when you look at the story, the villain it's a little confusing, because I feel like the villain in that movie is the Destroyer or whatever,
that machine
that
thing
metal
that
thing
shoots fire from its face. Yeah.
Yeah, that was terrible. It just didn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And every character that lived on Earth was bad in that movie. Every single one. And that sucked. Like, I would say, like, maybe Dr. Eric Selvig was the best one, but that might just be me being influenced by his appearances in later MCU movies.
Yeah, it's one of those
where
things.
Where he was a better character,
because he
showed up in Avengers
on.
and he was better.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't. It's not very good. What's yours? Or moving on the list, what's your number 21?
See, we're right in the ballpark here. It's Thor 1.
We're going pretty well. If we can keep this up, it'll be a nice fluent podcast.
That won't be any fun. I already know you, man. I know that there's no way you keep this pace. But
no, it's not.
I think that I enjoyed the mythology in Thor 1. I know it's so weird to think about, but my favorite scene, and I feel like for me the most memorable scene, is when Thor starts to teach Jane about how all the worlds are connected and how Asgard like watches over them, and was it like the 9 realms, something like that. I thought that was a really fun scene just because one, it is a lot of universe building, because that is something that we start to see later on in the MCU. But
yeah,
Yeah, for me, it's just that they really wasted. I feel like, I mean, Loki ends up, becoming the best, one of the best villains, at least in the franchise. And I feel like that's another thing, like his character's redeemed by the Avengers. But at least in Thor, I felt like, yeah, we probably should have seen more Loki because that destroyer thing, yeah, was just not working for me. And then,
Yeah.
there was just that scene when he's going into the base to try to get his hammer back. And before that, everyone's like playing the game, trying to lift the hammer. I feel like we
Yeah.
spent a lot of time there just talking about the hammer, and I was
Yeah.
like, we could have sped through this a little bit quicker.
Right.
And then the end, I felt like was still it at least ends well. It gives you a nice epic
Yeah.
feeling. She's looking for him, and he's gonna come back. But aside from that, there isn't really much I'd say I really enjoy about the movie. But I do. The one thing that I will say about Thor, though, after watching Thor 1, I became a giant fan of Idris Elba's character, Heimdall.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah,
I think
I
I
do
just
like
really
Heimdall.
loved Heimdall after that movie.
And you know what? He's not an Earth character because the Earth characters in these movies are bad.
I don't know what
That's why they
did.
got rid of him.
I don't know what they did to them. But moving on.
They're just poor characters. They're poorly written. My number 21 is Thor: The Dark World.
Ah,
I think this movie is just a hair above the first Thor. And I'll tell you why. So, clearly they didn't learn from the mistakes of Thor 1. They basically were like, hey, let's take this exact same movie and make it again, but with a worse villain, And, Malekith is known as, like, the worst. They even poke fun at it in Endgame, how bad that movie is. Like, Thor makes fun of that story, and I thought that was hilarious in Endgame. But, the thing that puts it over the top for me, this movie, is there are a couple, and just a couple, but Thor 1 has 0, but there are just a couple moments in this movie that are some of the most memorable in the MCU, in my opinion. Some that, like, you remember. I like when he's fighting and he beats everybody up and then he's like, anyone else? Like, I really like that moment. That's just one small little quip, but I really like it. And then, of course, there's an Infinity Stone in it, so there's a lot that I remembered from that. And I think a lot of those scenes were entertaining at the very least. And then the scene with Loki in the dungeon where
yes.
he's like, yeah, I like that scene a lot as well. So for me, it's really just like the only thing that barely pushes it over the first Thor is these memorable moments here and there. But even then, they're hardly anything. They're just so close. I would say those two movies are almost interchangeable for me. But moving on, what's your number 20?
One last thing about the original Thor. The one thing for me that really got that put it over the Dark World for me was that last scene where he's about to go fight the destroyer thing without his hammer. I was like, that is very bold of you, and that was a very cool scene. Whether or not it worked for the whole movie, but just at least in that moment, I was like, that was an epic scene. But okay, my 20th. So here's like my line. So fair warning, every movie beyond this I don't think is really bad. I just think it's hard to throw them up against all the other movies when you really try to rank them. But for me, it's Ant-Man and the Wasp. I felt like it regressed from the first Ant-Man because the first Ant-Man was really fun, and it was at least interesting to see that relationship between him and his daughter and everything that's going on with him. But then with Ant-Man and the Wasp, it was like, okay, so we're setting the tone. We're trying to bring back Jane, right? I was Janet, my bad. From that.
Jane Foster?
I wish we could bring her back into the MCU, but okay, yeah, so they're trying to bring back Janet, but then there's the whole ghost storyline, and for me it was just like, we really could have done the entire movie with more stakes without the ghost storyline. For me at least, it just felt like it really didn't add much. And then, of course, the way it ends, I feel like we kind of just don't see her again. And maybe in a third Ant-Man movie, they'll go back to it. And then in Endgame, we don't see her again. So I'm just like, oh, so did she just die? Or did she just disappear?
Yeah.
Did she get snapped? Like, I don't know. I just felt like so much time was spent on her character, and I felt like she had something good going for her character too. It's just that it just never got to be panned out. So that's my thing with Ant-Man and the Wasp. But aside from that, I really do enjoy Paul Rudd, and I really do enjoy their team up. But there's not much for me beyond that. It's like I said, it's not bad. It's just that there's just parts of it that are really unnecessary. So,
Yeah,
but
for
going
sure.
on, what's your number 20?
Yeah, I have plenty of thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I'll get to that whenever I get there. But my number 20, and I want to say the exact same thing you did. Every movie from here on out, I think those bottom three are pretty bad, but I would say every movie from here on out is good in some way. I wouldn't
Yeah,
say
it's like
they're all great.
I could watch it again.
I think some are kind of like below average or disappointing, at the least, but none of them are bad. So my number 20 is Iron Man 2. And I wanna preface that by saying I think this movie is very underrated because a lot of people think it's straight up bad.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't put it. It's nowhere near those Thor movies or the Incredible Hulk for me. Like it's nowhere near. It's just the leap, the giant gap in between for me. The giant gap in between Thor: The Dark World and Iron Man 2. It's really big, and they're still like right next to each other in my rankings, but there's a lot of space between them and every other movie, So I would say Iron Man 2 is my number 20 because I don't think it's great. Whiplash, Ivan Vanko, he's bad. He's just a really bad villain.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way around that. But Tony's character arc in this movie is spectacular. I mean, you go through, he deals with depression and all this stuff, and he gets back into like alcoholism and stuff like that, and it deals with these heavy issues, and his arc throughout the film is really, really, really good. Like, it's great, but it's just surrounded by a lot of things that are not very great. So I would say his character arc definitely carries the film, but it doesn't make the film good,
Interesting.
or it doesn't make the film great. It's not enough to push it up on a higher level than
That's
some
fair.
of these other ones.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, I'll have my thoughts on Iron Man 2 once I get to it in my ranking, but okay, I could see where you're coming from on that one.
So let's go to number 19. What's your 19?
19 for me is actually Iron Man 3.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually, that's why I was kind of caught off guard. I was like, I actually like Iron Man 2 a lot more than I like Iron Man 3. I think for me with Iron Man 3, it was, I don't know, I think for the one thing that sticks out to me is just, I felt like that ending we had was a little, I wouldn't say cheated, but I felt like that was like, oh, that's kind of it. When Pepper falls off and you think, oh my god, she just died, but part of that, she didn't die. There's just something about that. I can't explain it about if it's just instinct or if it's just because that's how some of these movies go. There's no way they could just kill a main character off like in that way. I mean, because it wasn't very dramatic to say the least. And then she just falls off, and that's kind of that. And she comes back, and then she hits the guy with like the steel thing, and I was just like, oh, okay. Like, it just, for me, it just felt really out of place in a way. It's kind of like we had this build up, and Tony, once again, that's the one thing I will say about the Iron Man movies. They really do push his character through everything. And that's like the thing I liked about this movie.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that's kind of it. I just like, it's another one of those things. Oh, and then of course the Mandarin was kind of a gut punch. I was just like, wow. I was expecting a lot more. But for me, whether people agree or disagree with that, I didn't like it. But that's my thing. So what's your number 19?
My number 19 is Ant-Man and the Wasp. A lot of people love this movie. It's like certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, and I was like, what? Why? I mean, It's not bad. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. It's just lighthearted fun, and that's all it is. I think the performances are good between Paul Rudd, Evangeline Lilly, and then Hannah John Kamen, the girl who plays Ghost. Like she had a solid character, but sometimes the story in this movie just stagnates. It just kind of stalls. And then my other thing is they had a really good thing going with this criminal side of Scott Lang, and this like he's really smart, and he shows it off in Ant-Man, in the first Ant-Man. How he's a burglar, and he's really good at it, and he's good at problem solving, and he does that a lot in the first movie. He is kind of a funny guy, he kind of messes around and jokes around a lot. He's a funny character, but when it comes down to it, he's really smart, and he can problem solve. But in this movie, he was almost reduced to a punchline. He was just the butt of a joke. He was just dumb.
Yeah.
The whole movie. Like, he was there for Hope Van Dyne to, like, make fun of him.
No, and, I mean, that's pretty accurate.
Like, outsmart him. And that was frustrating to me because, yeah, she is stronger than him and a lot more capable than him in a lot of ways in the first Ant-Man. But at the same time, he has a lot of redeeming qualities that make him a strong character, and a strong hero. And he loses all of them in this movie. And that bummed me out. And you could tell it was directed by two different people and done, or it wasn't directed by two different people, but Edgar Wright was heavily involved in the process of Ant-Man 1 before he dropped out. So, I could see where that came into play, how Ant-Man 1 was a movie that Peyton Reed, the director, in the end, he kind of adopted and finished, or kind of like, he came in and was like, okay, I'm going to work on this stuff that other people started for me. And then Ant-Man and the Wasp, it was kind of just like fully Peyton Reed's movie. And I didn't like his take on it as much. But that's my number 19. Let's jump to 18. What's your number 18?
So my 18's Avengers Age of Ultron. I just felt like it was just a stepping stone movie because it was a lot of world building, especially with that sequence from Scarlet Witch, and then she gets into their heads, and we spend a lot of time with this universe building and foreshadowing what's going to happen next to them in their individual story arcs. And for me, that's what it is. And then of course you get introduced to Claw, and I felt like we also did, in my opinion, waste a character. With Quicksilver, I just thought, wow, you guys created a good character. He was a cool character, and then that's just kind of how it ends. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, because I thought for how his character died in the movie, it made sense. But at the same time, it sucks to see a character get built up just for him to die, and that's kind of it. But aside from that, I thought Ultron was kind of... It was almost like... It's not that he was a bad villain, it was almost cliche. It was just... Yeah. What's the solution for every AI? Destroy humanity. All right. Well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I felt like for me that's the only reason it's down there. It's not that it's a bad movie. I think a lot of people give it unnecessary hate, but for me that's just where it falls. But what's your 18? Right? Yeah, 18.
You're not gonna like this.
Oh man.
At all.
Oh man.
I don't think most of the people who are listening are not going to like this, but I wish that it wasn't this way. But my number 18 is Spider-Man: Far From Home.
Oh man,
I'm very sorry. I want it to be higher. I really do. I wanted to like it so much more than I did. We spent an hour talking about this last week, so I'll keep it short. But if you listened to last week, you'll know that I did not love it. I like it. I just don't love it. And, I have some problems with it. I think it has a lot of the problems that Ant-Man and the Wasp has, where it's just lighthearted fun and doesn't allow itself to get deep enough for me. And that was sad to me. And how it also took a lot of things from Infinity War and Endgame and trivialized them and reduced them to jokes. That let me down. We've talked about that plenty, but yeah, number 18 for me is Spider-Man: Far From Home. I wanted that movie to be in the top 5, and I anticipated it to be, but it wasn't. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Moving on.
17.
Sorry about that. I know you
God.
probably are not.
I mean, I am gonna go on. I am
higher.
excited to get to Far From Home now, but I'm just like, wow,
Okay.
really?
I'll wait for. We'll wait for you to get there. We'll wait for you to get there. We'll wait. Number 17.
For me, it's Captain Marvel. I felt like
okay.
The cinematography for this one is really what killed it for me, and it's really hard to watch. Like, it feels like it's another one of those movies where it just feels like it's happening and they could have done a lot more, especially with like the space scenes, and especially for what her character is. I felt like they missed a lot of opportunities, at least cinematically, to make that movie look a lot better. And then for a while,
I agree with that. I think it could have been a lot. Yeah, they could have improved there.
And for me, that's like what it comes down to, because when you're, at least for me, like ranking through these other movies, the thing about them is that they all have pretty decent scripts, at least up until get to the top 10, because the top 10, of course, those are really great scripts. But then, so the Captain Marvel, I didn't really have an issue with the script. The story worked with the Skrulls and the Kree, and how it twists at the end. You're just like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And how she finds out about everything, it's like, okay, cool. But that's all there is to it. So for me, it's just like, there wasn't a big moment that I can say in this movie defined the movie for me, or the character, or brings her to another height of her character, if that makes sense. Not at least, well, not stacked against the other movies that I have left. Kinda, okay. Yeah. And I mean, that, like I said, it's like, I'd still give the movie probably like a B or a B plus.
Yeah.
It's just that like when you stick it against, Iron Man, Captain America, Ant-Man, even Doctor Strange, it's really hard to bridge the gap from beginning to end to see her character change. Because when you watch these other characters change on screen, you can really feel it and you can really see it. I feel like, at least in a way where it's more, what's the word I'm looking for? I guess it's just a bigger jump, and in a good way. And I felt like that's why for me I had to be nitpicky, and it's just I had to go right. That's the one thing that killed it for me. Like, it's hard to watch the movie like physically because of the cinematography in it.
That's how Spider-Man Far From Home is me. It's hard for me to watch it because it takes a character I love and does a lot of things that I don't like. So I understand that feeling of watching a movie and you watch it and you're like, this sucks. Like, this is sad. It's hard to do this, Yeah,
because it's just a giant missed opportunity. I was like, it's okay. I mean, she's gonna have another movie, and I'm sure it's gonna be 100% better. But
and there are plenty of movies like that, for sure. So let's move on. My number 17 is Captain America: The First Avenger. Mm-hmm. Now, this movie is good. I would say all the movies that I put, well, not even that. This is a movie that's really, really solid. Mm-hmm. And it's crazy that I'm at number 17 and I'm saying it's really solid. 17 out of 23. But it is. I really like it. It's very much a war film, and it feels like it. Mm-hmm. The second act is kind of Mm-hmm. I think it loses itself for the second act, but the first and the third act gets off to a strong start, and it finishes very strong as well. So I really, I love Steve Rogers' character. Mm-hmm. Chris Evans is incredible. He is perfect casting for the role, and the way they develop it is just adorably pure, Yeah. Red Skull is a solid villain. He's very menacing, I feel like. And the ending seals the deal. Like, with him going in the ice and on the radio with Peggy, like, ugh.
No, I feel you.
It hurts. That is sad. That is so sad. That moment is just heartbreaking. And of course, in retrospect, now that we've seen Endgame, we know that it's okay. But it's still a really sad moment. But let's move on. What's your number 16?
Captain America: The First Avenger.
Hey.
See, that's why I completely agree with you. For me, the only other thing I have to tack on there is, it's funny when we talk about character progression, right? That's obviously the main thing with storytelling. It's, you want to get as far away from the beginning once you're at the end, because that's how they change. That's what I find so interesting about Captain America is that he's kind of the same from beginning to end, but the way they portray that, it's like, all right, well, to what extreme is he willing to go? Because,
Yeah.
the change is
Yeah.
obviously the physical, right? But then it really just is a true testament to his character that, oh, he is really willing to be the guy to jump on the bomb and save everybody, no matter what the cost is. And I think for me
Yeah.
that was what was really beautiful about that movie, and it's something that really only works for Captain America, because yeah, it's like if you had kept Iron Man the same from the beginning of his movie to the end of his movie, we'd be like, well, we learned nothing here. But with Cap, at least I feel like that's the one time it works, and because I feel like a big part of that is the war theme, because that's in that genre you can have that. No, I'm a hero, and I'm gonna and like the story is what's my heroic act that proves to himself too that he is who he thinks and says he is. So
Yeah,
for me,
for sure.
that's where I clock in at 16 is Captain America.
Yeah, for sure. My number 16 is Doctor Strange. I think this is a good movie too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a hair better than Captain America, the 1st Avenger. The pacing is not very good. The villain is pretty bad. Both Caecilius and Dormammu, both of those characters are... I mean, Dormammu is, like, really cool, but at the same time, he's just, like, not very much a character,
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think Caecilius was very good either. But Benedict Cumberbatch absolutely killed it. I loved him in this movie. I'm very hyped for Doctor Strange 2 and all the things that it brings in on top of all the stuff that they started, and the visual effects are stunning. The only thing in the MCU that's comparable in terms of mind-boggling visual effects is that Mysterio sequence in Far From Home, because both of those, like, it's just unbelievable. And Doctor Strange has, like, it's like that, but almost an entire movie of it, and they employ it so many times.
No, definitely.
So I really, really like Doctor Strange. I think visual effects and cinematography are great in this movie. But yeah, that's my number 16.
Mm-hmm.
What is your number 15?
15 for me is Iron Man 2. So with this one, yeah, you're right. The villain is really bad. However, I think this is another one of those things where for at least for me, it did work for Tony carrying the film. Because, yeah, to see him go through depression, alcoholism, it was really emotional, especially for his character. And then I do like, this is one of the cases where I'll enjoy it, I do like the universe building, with Scarlett Johansson's character coming in this one. And then of course, Rhodey taking the suit. And I thought that was one of the best scenes in that movie, was when Rhodey finally takes the suit from him. He's like, give me the suit, and they have that fight in his house. Because for him to reach that level, and I thought that this one too, the issue of when he comes in the beginning, right? And he's like, I've brought world peace. It's like, what more do you want from me? And they're like, oh, well, surrender the suit so we can make more. It's like, no, I mean, it's a very similar argument to Civil War. And it's like, and I'll touch up on that more, but I felt like it is another one of those things where in the bigger picture of the MCU, it really just shows how much more Tony is changing as he goes. And of course, I love the action scenes at the end. I thought that was one of my favorite action scenes actually from the MCU, is watching him and Rhodey blast through all those basically droids. But for me,
For sure.
yeah, that's where Iron Man 2 lands at 15. What about you?
My number 15 is Avengers Age of Ultron. I like this movie a lot. I don't think it's very bad. I think it is very entertaining. It's a very likable movie.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't, I think a favorite movie and a good movie are very different things.
Yes.
And I think I could see Age of Ultron being my favorite movie before I could see it being a very good movie, if that makes sense.
No, that's completely fair.
You sit down and watch this and you're going to have fun. It's very enjoyable to watch. The action is great. It keeps you on the edge of your seat, I feel like. That being said, I think there are certain plot lines and just flaws in the script in terms of the way they wrote Ultron, where he's cracking jokes. I would have liked him to be a little bit more serious, which makes me glad Joss Whedon wasn't the one to take on Thanos. But certain plot lines like that, and then also the whole Natasha and Bruce thing, I don't mind them getting together. They just didn't have a whole lot of chemistry, and they were written poorly. So it just didn't work. I think it could have, but it didn't.
No, that's fair. That's something I completely forgot too when I mentioned Age of Ultron. That was another thing that got to me. I was like, that was one of the worst pairings that they could have came up with.
Yeah. But it is enjoyable, and that's what I can applaud it for that. So, what is your number 14? We're moving on. We're almost halfway there.
I know. 14 for me is Ant-Man. I enjoyed Ant-Man 1 a lot. For me, it is one of those movies. It's like, not only does it have a good story, the villains, meh. I mean, to be fair, when we're in this area, a lot of the Marvel villains become meh at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually really enjoyed Ant-Man, and I loved watching him. Really, his character. It's another one of those things where it's a character-driven movie, and watching Scott's character change and become a hero, and he's doing this for his daughter, and you can really see that, and that's what that theme is for me. And there's that father-daughter bond. And eventually, of course, it's what brings him back out of that. The quantum zone?
Quantum.
I don't know why I just spaced.
I can't think of it either.
Wow. But
in the
anyways,
quantum realm.
There you go.
Is that it?
Yes. And then watching him come back from that, and then this is another movie too where I actually love the effects and it's something that's fun to watch, because watching him shrink down, that's a hard power to put on screen, because one, that is a lot of CGI, and two, that's really hard to make look good. So watching that happen was actually really fun to watch, and it's one of those things where it's like, you really took what this character's power is and made them and maximized it from a cinematography standpoint, so I applauded them for that. What's your 15, right? 15? 14.
14. We're on 14. My number 14 is also Ant-Man 1.
Oh, nice.
That's the first one we've had the same number, same movie. But yeah, Ant-Man 1, that's my number 14. Basically everything you said. When they were marketing this movie, it was like, a movie about Ant-Man? Really? Ant-Man? But it was solid. It was great, because I think the filmmakers knew that Ant-Man is kind of a ridiculous name, and they even poke fun at it, and I love that. And it is kind of a silly concept, and they make it work, and they know that it's a silly concept when they're making the movie, and that is what makes it work, is because they know that going in. So yeah, I would agree. The villain, weakest point of the movie for sure, but the movie as a whole is pretty strong. The dynamic between him being a father and also a criminal is really intriguing. I really, really enjoy that. But yeah, that's my number 14. Let's move on. What is your number 13?
So 13, I clocked in at Doctor Strange. So for this one, it really was the visuals that really set me off. I was like, wow, that is one thing, like, first and foremost that got to me. Yeah, Dormammu and Caclius are horrible villains, but
Caclius.
I don't know how to say that. That's how immemorable he is. But I thought the story arc with the Ancient One. I almost said the Ancient One was really good, because I didn't see that one coming either. I was like, oh,
yeah.
And then
where she had
and like that level of hypocrisy was interesting. And then of course with Doctor Strange himself, Benedict Cumberbatch killed it. That was a really great performance, especially having to imagine that he's doing a lot of that in a green box for that trippy sequence. Yeah, so that was really good on his part.
Yeah.
But aside from that, there isn't much else that I have to say that you haven't already said about it. But the last thing is, his character progression towards becoming Doctor Strange was really great. And I think one of my favorite lines in there that I get to use a lot just as a joke, it's not all about you. While she's dying, I was like, that's a great moment. Like, for me, I was like, that's a fun moment. But that's where I'm at. What's your 13?
My number 13 is The Avengers, the first one. I like this movie. It's solid. It remains. I love how comic booky it is. It's very fun. It's very colorful. It very much feels like a comic book brought to life on a screen. And I really, really applaud that. I think Loki was one of the best. He's the first great villain of the MCU, I would say.
Yeah.
A lot of that can be attributed to Tom Hiddleston. Just his performance is brilliant. And I really enjoy this movie. I think what sets it apart from every other movie, maybe other than Infinity War, on this list is it's such a feat. When you look at it in the history of cinema, it brought all these characters together for the first time, and that is amazing to watch. So yeah, that's my number 13. Let's move on. What is your number 12?
All right, number 12 for me is Guardians of the Galaxy 1. I mean, I love Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. The only thing that really knocked it down for me was Ronan, just because he's not the greatest villain there, and I think with the remaining movies we have for the most part pretty good villains, except for maybe one of them. But
yeah,
I just thought that, of course, the soundtrack and the score are great. I think the script needs to be given a lot more credit for the way it balances all the characters and gives all the characters a strong progression without really doing too much or not enough for each of them.
Yeah.
And I think that's
definitely.
That's what's really hard about these team-up movies, especially, is just balancing all of your characters. And for me, I think Guardians was really one of those ones that just nailed it. The only thing they couldn't really nail is the villain. But that's where it clocks in for me. What about you?
My number 12 is Captain Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with a lot that you said. I think there was a lot more potential in terms of cinematography and visuals to make this more epic than it was, but I do still enjoy it a lot. I think it does have kind of a slow start, and like you said, this falls into the cinematography thing. It doesn't have much of an artistic style or anything that sets it apart as unique from any of these movies, or any movie, but I do love the characters. I think all the characters were written really well, especially I really like Talos, Ben Mendelsohn's character. He is, obviously he was a fan favorite. He's one of my favorites. Love him. I want to see him in so much more things. But I would say, I wanted to say this. You were saying, when you were talking about Captain Marvel, you said there's no point in the movie that marks like how she's changed, right? That's what you said? Like no point in the movie that really like
puts the exclamation point on it, where it's just like, wow, like you really, like, for example, like for me it's like, here's the one from Far From Home, where it's just like where he finally uses his Peter tinkle, and you're just like, you have that epic moment.
Okay.
For me, I didn't feel that with Captain Marvel.
I did. And I didn't, it's funny, I didn't feel it in Far From Home, but I did feel it in Captain Marvel, because the moment when what's his name, Jan Rog, Jude Law's character, is like, prove to me that you can beat me without your powers and all this stuff, and she's like, no, I don't need to. I love that, because she's been suppressed her entire life to not use her powers, and basically held back, and they only let her be like half of what she could be, and when she finally comes into herself and goes Super Saiyan whatever, and she she realized, she's like, I don't need to listen to you. Like, why do I need to listen to you? And I really like that moment where she's like, there's no reason that you should be in charge of me. Like, I have every right to use my powers and kick your butt, and like knock you down, because I don't need to prove to you. I've done enough proving my entire life that I'm capable without my powers. Now I have these powers, and I don't need to prove it to you. So I love that moment. But let's move on. What's your number 11?
So for the number 11 for me is The Avengers. Okay. I mean, not much that you haven't already covered. It's a great movie. It's really, our first good villain in the MCU, at least at that point. And Loki kills it. Tom Hiddleston did a great job. But I think for me, I know it's going to sound really picky. Maybe it's just because it's dated. But for me, one thing that really just sets this one down here at this level is the costume design. Because, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at some of it, I'm just like, oh man, like a whole room of people got together and said, that looks great. And I was like, really? Especially Captain America.
And then they went to Endgame and they made fun of it. Like, they poke fun at all these mistakes
Yeah.
like Thor: The Dark World and Captain America's bad costume. Like when they go back and I'm talking about Endgame, different movie, but I love that in Endgame how they're so self-aware.
I know, it's like, we can make fun of it. He's like, yeah, that suit did not do you justice, man.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for me,
sure.
it was like, how'd you go from, the first Avenger to that? I was like, oh, man. But aside from that,
Yeah,
it's really good. I mean, it's one of those movies where it keeps you going from start to finish, and every moment leading up into the final act, you're just like, holy crap, like, what's going to happen next? Especially when he's gathering the team up, and it should be noted that is another one of the best fight scenes there between Iron
for
Man,
sure.
Thor, and Captain. But that's where I'm at, number
Yeah.
11.
So my number 11 is Iron Man 3. I really like this movie. I am one of this movie's
Wow, yeah. I was like, I did
defenders.
not see. I mean,
I love it. I love the way it deals with anxiety and post-traumatic stress disorder. I haven't seen that in any other superhero movie. I haven't seen that dealt with the way that it deals with it in this movie. And I love it. I love it so much. Obviously, the Mandarin, like you said, it was a little bit of a meh, and it lets you down.
yeah, it's a gut punch,
For me,
man.
For me, I like it. I think it's genius. And I also like that the real Mandarin is still out there in the MCU. Shout out Shang-Chi. But we're gonna in this movie, I really like this movie, and I like the twist. I think it's a really, really smart twist because it defies your expectations, but it's been there all along with the whole other storyline with Aldrich Killian. But another thing, like the thing that I love about it is the way that it deals with Tony's anxiety and PTSD. I love that so much. It's very, very grounded, and I like it for that. Let's move on. Number 10.
Oh, here we go. The top 10.
The top 10. We're here.
All right. Number 10. Thor Ragnarok.
Okay.
When I first watched
Me
this
too.
movie, I hated it. Like,
Yeah?
yeah, when I watched it in theaters, I hated it. I mean, the visuals and the sound design gave me a headache, and I was like, I want to leave. And then I was finally like, you know what? I should rewatch it. Maybe I just wasn't in the mood. So I watched it on Netflix, and it's weird. I enjoyed it so much. I was like, damn, this is a really good movie. I mean, Hela's great. I love Thor's character arc in this one. I mean, they finally gave Thor a really great character arc, and especially his relationship with Loki throughout the movie. I love that it's back and forth. And then I thought Valkyrie had a really good character too. I thought that her backstory was really tragic, of course. So for her to come back, and that's another one dealing with, running away from your problems and coming back and fixing it. And then I think the biggest thing for me too was Thor at the end realizing, about being a king and everything. It's not about the place, it's about the people. And for me, it was that was a really powerful moment when he decided, I'm going to destroy Asgard, just because, I mean, that's like been his entire objective the entire time, is to save Asgard through 3 movies. It's to be the king, is to always protect it. But yep.
Yeah. I like the Asgard is a people, not a place thing. I really like that a lot.
And it's at your number 10 too, right?
It is my number 10. Basically everything you said. My only issue that I could have with this movie, I think it's one fault, is that sometimes they joke a little bit too much, but hardly at all. There are only a couple moments that it does that, whereas movies, in my opinion, movies like Far From Home and Ant-Man and the Wasp, they do that way too much for me, for my taste. Ragnarok does it really well, and they implement humor in the right way for the most part, and it's really funny. This is a great movie to sit down and watch with your friends if you need something to watch. Like,
that's very true.
I've watched this movie, like, that's kind of my go-to whenever people are like, what movie should we watch? I'm like, Thor Ragnarok, trust me. And it's so funny, and everybody loves it. So I think it could have been better if it was a little bit of a longer runtime. Movie is only about an hour and 40 minutes, so it is pretty short, but it didn't need that for sure. So moving on, what's your number 9?
So number 9, Spider-Man Far From Home. I mean, we talked about it all last week, but for all I'm going to say is, yeah, I thought this was a really big stepping stone for his character. And I think really seeing Peter come in as his own was the best part of the movie, of course. And on top of that, with a great villain. So not much to say there, but it's number 9 for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry that you put it at number 9 and I put it at number 18. But my number 9 is Guardians of the Galaxy 1. This really is the first film of its kind, in my opinion, that I've seen. I mean, I may not be super well versed in like movies that came out before I was born, but I think the blending of a space comedy with this music from James Gunn's own childhood and the way he pulled it off is just like, it's brilliant, and that's what makes it so timeless. Ronan is a really bad villain, but everything else in the movie is spectacular. Something that I love about both of these Guardians films is Rocket Raccoon's CGI. I don't think it gets enough credit. You talked about the character arcs. I do agree. All the Guardians have wonderful arcs. They all change from the beginning to the end, and I love that. But Rocket's CGI, specifically, just the look of him, the way that they make this raccoon be able to evoke human emotion is awesome.
Yeah, that's how I felt about Groot.
Yeah, Groot too. Both of them. Like, Groot's a tree and Rocket is a raccoon, and both of them, you can see when they're crying, when they're sad, when they're angry. You see it in their eyes, and it's brilliant CGI, and I don't think Rocket gets enough credit, or Groot, in either of these movies for sure. But let's move on. What is your number 8?
So number 8 for me is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. For me, it's basically take everything you love about Guardians 1 and then add a really good villain. And boom, you have Guardians 2. I mean,
I
felt
absolutely love this movie.
Yeah, the conflict between him and Ego, I was like, wow, that's horrible. You finally find your dad.
Yeah.
And he wants to murder everybody.
And he killed your mom.
I know. I was just like, oh my God.
That twist is shocking.
And then,
it's jaw-dropping.
And then to finally see Peter really like embrace his power at the end in that fight scene, that was another CGI amazing fight scene. But
yeah,
to see him finally
to embrace it, and then give it up.
Because for Quill, he's just been this almost like a comic relief, like leader for the most part. And then in Guardians 1, it was about the team. But this one is really about him, and to see him really get serious and have that moment for me was just huge. And I thought that was great writing.
Chris Pratt really showed his range.
Yes.
In that movie. Like, up until then, he'd really been just comedy. There are a couple moments in Guardians 1, but for the most part, he's just a comedy actor, period. And he really showed how dramatic he can be and how good he can be at that drama in Volume 2, I think.
Definitely. But what is your number 8?
We're on... Yeah, my number 8 is... Yeah, you're correct. I had to check. I thought you had it wrong. My number 8 is Iron Man 1. This movie holds up so much better than you would think it is. You would think it does. I think this movie is the reason that we have the MCU. Not just... Obviously, it's the reason we have the MCU because it was the first one.
Yes.
But beyond that, because of how good it is, that is what kept people interested in the MCU. And because of Robert Downey Jr. and his performance and his take, because of all the things that this movie brought to the table, people became invested. And up until the Avengers in 2012, and after that, that I think people came to see the Avengers because of the draw that started with Iron Man 1, and after the Avengers, it just skyrocketed from there,
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, I love this movie. CGI still holds up, like we said. Robert Downey Jr., maybe the most perfect casting you could find for a character. Brilliant. I would say, and a lot of people forget, Obadiah Stone, the villain.
Yeah, Jeff Bridges.
I would say he was a really good villain. I'd say they had a good villain, and then they had a really good villain, and then they just had like lackluster villains for a long time. It was just him and Loki for the longest time. But yeah, I like this movie a lot. So let's move on. What is your number 7?
So here's where I know it's gonna get a little dicey. Number 7 for me is actually Avengers Endgame.
What? Okay.
For me, it's just a lot of it. I feel like is a lot of hype, and a lot of it is great. You know, a lot of it. You have a lot of great moments like Cap wielding Thor's hammer, all the time travel, the scene with Natasha jumping off the cliff. All right, those are great moments. But for me, it takes so long in between some of these moments. I'm just like, this movie didn't have to be 3 hours long. I felt that.
Yeah.
And I actually like
I
Cap's decision at the end to go back. I love that for his character, but watching him in the past, you know, going into Peggy's office and everything, that took a while, and then Tony having to talk to his dad, and even though it felt like we had already gotten closure on that part of Tony's story, I didn't know like why we had to get more of it. It was just like, why are we doing this? This is another like 30 minutes that we could have shaved off or could have done some more of. But for me, that's the only thing with it. It's just some of the moments are really spread apart, and there's some things in there that don't have to be there, like those two. And then the other one, here's all I'm gonna say about this shot is that I don't hate it, and I don't wish they would have cut it. I just don't think that it's necessary as the A4 shot, just because. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really need to be there. That's the only thing. It kind of just adds more fan service. And like I said, that's not a bad thing. It's just, it does add more time to your movie. So for me, that's where it stands, is at number 7. What is your number 7?
My number 7 is Avengers Infinity War. I love this movie. I'll never forget.
What? Okay.
You know, the first time I watched this movie. You don't like that it's number 7 for me?
No, 7.
I'll explain. I'll explain. I think it's great. I think every movie from here on up, I think this is, for me, the top 7 movies. This is when it hits that tier of great.
Oh, yeah, definitely. For me, it was at the top 10, but yeah.
Yeah. So this movie and every movie beyond it, for me, is on another level. My issue with it is the third act is it's kind of a punch fest, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of action, and it's a lot of characters, and it's almost too much sometimes, but that is my only issue with it. That's the only thing that kind of pulls it back for me.
Gotcha.
One thing I love about this movie is that Thanos is the main character from a story perspective.
Yes.
He has the most screen time, and the way they portray him is he's on this quest, and the heroes are very defensive. Whereas in most movies, the heroes are on the quest, and the villain is defensive, you know? And I really, really love that about this movie is how Thanos is the main character.
Yes.
And that's brilliant.
It's a classic.
And they...
Go on.
And they pull it off. They pull it off so well because it's a heist film. I mean, he's got to get these stones, and he does. So it's just more epic than any other heist film ever. But yeah, that's my number 7. What is your number 6?
Number 6 for me is Captain America: Civil War. So I don't know why. I feel like this movie gets hated a lot for its lack of cinematography, and I was like, really? I'm like, first of all, it makes sense for them to be in an airport. Okay, like that's the scene that I see get a lot of crap. So then for me, for what they did, especially the action choreography in the airport, I was like, oh, that was really good. And for me, it doesn't take me out of the movie at all. If anything, it makes me a lot more hyped. And I know that it doesn't compare to the comic book Civil War. But of course, it's still an epic shot to see them really about to fight each other for the first time. And yeah. I just felt like this is one of those movies where it's like you don't have a villain minus Zemo, you know, minus him, you know, but you don't really have a really true villain because it's really about Cap versus Iron Man.
There's no good guy, bad guy.
Yeah, and it's like you could really agree with either side, and it just so happened that in this one case scenario that Captain America was right. You know, like we needed, this is why our powers are best in our own hands. But still, you could still make a case for Iron Man's side, and I feel like that's what it's all about, is that conflict there, and especially to see them fight it out at the end. And then this one thing, like this kryptonite for Captain America is Bucky, you know, and for him to see that he's willing to turn his back on the Avengers for him. That was a heartbreaking thing for me to see them break up. And then the only thing I will say about this one though is is that line where he's like, "I'm sorry, Tony. He's my friend," and then Tony's like, "So was I." Sometimes I'm just like, you weren't really friends. You're kind of coworkers, but you're not really like. At no point were you guys ever.
You don't like that line?
It's not that I don't like it. I mean, it fits the story, but at the same time, I'm like, you're not really friends though. You guys kind of hate each other and disagree on everything.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah, but aside from that, it's really great, and especially that's another one where they balance all the characters that they have to handle. And introducing Black Panther and everything. Yeah, that was a great one. But what is your number 6?
And Spider-Man. They introduced Black Panther and Spider-Man, and they pulled off both of those characters really well. Actually, those are two of my favorite incarnations of those characters. Is that specific movie? I love the way they handle Spider-Man in that movie. Speaking of Spider-Man, my number 6 is Spider-Man: Far From Home. What a nice transition.
Wait, you mean Spider-Man: Homecoming or?
No, Homecoming. I
was like, wait, what?
I'm so sorry. I ruined my nice transition because I got the title wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my number 6. It's Spider-Man: Homecoming. I love this movie a lot. I think they nailed it. I think Vulture is just chilling to the bone as a villain.
Mm-hmm.
He's unbelievable. That's an edge that Homecoming had over Far From Home, in my opinion, and that Vulture had over Mysterio, in my opinion. I love Vulture so much. He's very, very terrifying. I love his connection to Peter through Liz. I love that. We talked a little bit about this movie last week, so I won't say much more. But yeah, this movie is solid, and it's really good. Moving on. Top 5.
Oh, here
what
we
is
go.
Your number 5?
Number 5 for me is Iron Man. The original Iron Man is just so good because 1, it's really timeless. 2, I feel like there's never really a dull or slow moment, and if there is a slower moment, there's a reason it's there. Like watching Tony be upset in his basement while he sees all the things going on in the world that he knows he can fix as Iron Man, just leads to him going to go fix it himself. Those are, and then I feel like this is also it's rare for it to be in a Marvel movie where they handle both comedy and seriousness really well. Kind of like our thing with Thor Ragnarok, it's just that there are a couple times where they could have been a little more serious. With Iron Man, I felt like that was like the bar. That was perfect. The combination of, we have a couple moments to laugh here, but we also have it to be really serious. And of course, it was taking out the fact of its legacy and that it started, minus all that, just as a movie. The way, of course, Iron Man's character progresses is great. And I think the acting from Jeff Bridges really gets me. It's almost chilling, especially when they're in the reactor room. And he's like, I can't build. He's like, Tony Stark built this in a cave. I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm low-key kind of scared. But I think he doesn't get enough credit as a villain. But
not at all.
Yeah, you've said a lot about Iron Man, but that's where it falls for me, is number 5. What about you? It's 5.
My number 5 is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. This was the Russo brothers' first film in the MCU, and they killed it. I mean, I obviously, all of their movies for me are in my top 7, which is really high praise in such a good group of movies that is the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this movie. The political thriller, it's really good. The villain is awesome. I love, the whole mystique of the Winter Soldier, how you don't know who he is. And then when you find out, you're like, oh my God. And then the whole twist with S.H.I.E.L.D. being bad the whole time. And then the final fight between Cap and Bucky. This movie, for me, is the first movie that I would be very confident in saying it's 10 out of 10. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. And only this one and the 4 above it in the MCU reach that 10 out of 10 for me. But yeah, I love The Winter Soldier. Great movie. What is your number 4?
Number 4 for me is Spider-Man: Homecoming. I think for me it was such a different take on the origin of Spider-Man. I know we saw his somewhat sort of origin in Civil War, like at least his MCU origin, I think is the best way to go about it. But we talked about it last week, how it's like, oh, I wish I could have saw Uncle Ben. Of course, I still stand by that. But a part of me too is just like, this is the MCU's take on Spider-Man, and it is a big departure for the most part from, the original character and that we've seen in other movies. But I just think, one, the script is really good, and Tom Holland kills it as Spider-Man, and two, yeah, Vulture is probably the third best villain in the MCU, maybe in at least top 5. But I think a big part of this movie that strikes me as why it's number 4 is how relatable it is for everybody, because Vulture's relatable,
Yeah.
Spider-Man's relatable, and I think they take that relatability to an extreme in this movie, so it feels like it hits right at home, no pun intended. But that's fine. That's where it comes in at number 4.
Yeah. My number 4 is Captain America Civil War. I love this movie. Some people don't like it. Like you said, I agree with just about everything you said, except for the "so was I" line. I really like that line. But everything else you said about the airport, about all that stuff, Black Panther and Spider-Man's introductions, I love them both. So yeah, I think this movie is great. This is also another 10 out of 10 from the Russo brothers. I think that they handled the balance of characters really well, and that's kind of why they got the job to direct Infinity War and Endgame, especially Infinity War. You have to balance all these characters, and they did it pretty well in Infinity War, but they did it really well in Civil War, I think. And I think Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in this movie is maybe his very best performance in a Marvel movie, because when he sees that Bucky is the one that killed his parents.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Just your reaction just now of me just reminding you of that moment. I mean, good Lord, like that. It's so grounded and it's so raw, like the emotion that hits you. And I love when that happens in movies, that you just feel it and it hurts you to see it, Yeah. And when Steve like, he knew all along and stuff, but he didn't want to tell him. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, when he's like, it's
even in the final fight scene when obviously Captain America beats him in the final fight scene, but the whole time, anytime that Tony has any lines, or if they show his face in the mask, it's brilliant acting. It's so good. His performance is amazing. And that final line where he's like, that shield doesn't belong to you, my father made it, or whatever.
Yeah.
And then Cap just drops the shield. Such a powerful moment because of the line deliverance by RDJ is just great. And then it's such a powerful moment for Cap's character because he's like, I don't need this.
Yeah.
Fine, take it. I don't care. I just want Bucky,
The only other thing on that one too is after they find out and everything and they're in the room, and then he's just like, Tony, it wasn't his fault. And Tony's just like, I don't care. He killed my mom. I was like, oh God, yeah. It's going down.
Yeah.
Like for me, it's just
that
like,
hurts, man.
That hurts. It's like, I don't care if it's not his fault.
Yeah. And I will say, last thing before we move on to your number 3, I love Baron Zemo in this movie. A lot of people didn't like him because he wasn't true to the comics, but personally, I don't care, because the way that they brought him in and had him be this grand architect behind all of it to pit the Avengers against themselves, I love the way they did that. They nailed it. But yeah, you're number 3.
I definitely flip back and forth on Zemo, but I'm always sort of leaning towards, what? He makes sense. So at least, I may not, whether I like him or not, at least he makes sense. But for me, number 3 is Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Man.
Okay.
The Winter Soldier was amazing. I felt like for me, this was like the Dark Knight for the MCU. It was, I can't say just because the last 2 for me are like, wow. But for me, it was that Captain America, the Winter Soldier was really, in a way, dark. And it was that like political drama, and that one, the fight choreography in this movie is amazing. The elevator scene, his fight with Bucky on the freeway, his last fight with
Absolutely.
Bucky. I mean, all of it was great. And then, of course, introducing Falcon. That was really fun. And then I love
For
that.
sure.
I love the chemistry that Captain America has with Black Widow. I mean, I love that it's not a romantic chemistry, but they have a really good chemistry on screen. That you're bouncing off each
Yeah,
other.
as
Yeah,
work partners.
like he's the Boy Scout, and she's like the bad influence, sort of. And I
Yeah.
enjoy that their performances in this one. Of course, the one thing that steals the show is the emotional struggle with Bucky. Because of course this guy is really, and he's evil, but it's not really his fault. But that's his best friend, and of course he's trying to save the world. What do you do in that scenario? And especially for him to at the end to say, "I'm with," he's like, "I'm not gonna kill you," he's like, "Because I'm with you till the end of the line." I was like, man, that's one of like
Ugh.
the most perfectly placed lines I've seen. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there aren't enough good things to say about the Winter Soldier.
For sure.
Well, what is your number three?
My number 3 is Black Panther. Um, the only MCU movie to be nominated for Best Picture. Totally deserved it. I love this movie. I think one of the comparisons I like to make is Wakanda and Asgard. When you look at Asgard as a place in those first 2 Thor movies, you can tell they wanted to make it very entrancing and very much like you're wrapped into this setting, and the setting itself can kind of become a character.
Yeah.
In the best, I think in the best, some of the best movies that, or even TV shows, when you look at Stranger Things seasons 1 and 2, the Upside Down kind of becomes its own character. Like there's something about it that there's just an extra layer to it, and it's very well developed to where you feel like it's its own character, and the setting's very entrancing in that sense. I think they wanted that with Asgard, but they didn't get it. And so that's why in Thor Ragnarok, most of it's not in Asgard, and then they end up just destroying it all in all. In Black Panther, they nailed it. I mean, Wakanda feels so awesome. Like you want to go there. Like it just feels so cool. And the whole time it's enthralling because the whole time that they're in Wakanda, and when they like fly through the mountain, and it opens up to Wakanda for the first time, and you're like, wow, this is really awesome. And they really do a great job at immersing you in that culture and creating this world. And I think they nailed it with that. Killmonger is awesome.
Oh,
Maybe the best. I don't want to say the best villain, but I think he has the best motivation of any villain I've ever seen, because he was right. He was just going about it the wrong way, So I love that. The score is brilliant. The characters are brilliant. It's a great movie. Yeah, that's my number 3. What is your number 2?
Number 2 is Black Panther for me, so this is perfect.
Okay.
But on top of all things you said, yeah, Killmonger is in that club of, he has a point though. He might be going about it the wrong way, but he has a point. And it's not even just that for me. Yeah, of course the score is amazing. The script is amazing. The only knock I have on this movie is that one fight scene between Black Panther and Killmonger, where it looks like it hadn't finished rendering yet. But aside from that part, the cinematography in this movie is amazing. I mean, from that opening shot of like this, like the dust thing like falling, and then the car chase scene, for me that was really great. And then anything that takes place in that like astral plane that they go to, that spiritual world,
it's beautiful.
I was just so mesmerized throughout the entire movie. And then the way that the suit looks on him, and then that shot of him coming back to fight Killmonger, and he's like, I didn't yield and I'm not dead. I thought that was really epic. And for me, it's pretty much, I don't know, there's just something about this movie that it hits all the things that you want out of a good movie. And that's why for me, it's just, it has to be number 2. And especially because Michael B. Jordan too, though, I think that's one thing. His performance as Killmonger, not only is Killmonger written really well, but I love Michael B. Jordan as an actor, and seeing his performance there was extra. I mean, that was just icing on the cake. But
for sure,
I think the last thing I have to say about it, my favorite moment from that one is this your king? That's when I was just like, damn, is this your king? I was like, ooh, he got you.
Yeah, and he's dead. He didn't die. Well, he did die, actually. They brought him back. Yeah. Anyways, my number 2 is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I love this movie so much. I if I ever have a bad day, or if I'm just feeling sad or depressed or lonely, I watch this movie because it makes me feel good. It's such a feel good movie, and it's such a good movie too. I mean, that's why I chimed in so much whenever you brought it up, because I could talk about it forever. I really, really, really do love it. And the cinematography is beautiful. The visual effects, they're groundbreaking. It, like you said, it takes everything from Guardians Volume 1, makes it a little bit better, and then adds a great villain in Ego. I love Ego. The twist that he killed Peter's mom, that personal connection they have, it's very, very awesome. Like I said, the scene where Peter uses his powers that he's like wanted his whole life. Like, he gets these awesome powers, and knowing Peter, he's like a little kid, so it's gotta be his dream come true, you know, to have those awesome powers. And then he has to use them to kill his own father and knowingly give up those powers. So I love that moment, and I love Yondu's sacrifice. It's very, very heart-wrenching.
Man, that was heartbreaking.
Yondu was Peter's dad the whole time, and they weren't biological, but Yondu brought him up.
That was his daddy.
Made him who he is, you know? And yeah, I love that movie and everything about it. The last thing I'll say, the scene with Yondu and Rocket, when Rocket is yelling at Yondu and Yondu's like, I know who you are because you're me, that gets you, because they have very similar upbringings, and they're both very broken characters. That's what these Guardians films are about, is broken characters finding a family and becoming whole through that. So that's my number 2. I could talk about it for the entire hour if I wanted. But number 1, what is your number 1 movie,
of course,
in the MCU?
The only one left, Avengers Infinity War. Oh man. For me, it's just that this movie really gets you going from minute 1 to the end credits. I mean, there is no break in here. I mean, this movie is just, it's so tightly written for like a 3-hour movie that you just can't help but take your eye, you can't look away. And then for me too, it's like what you said earlier about it. Thanos is probably the ultimate villain because he has a point. He's going about it the wrong way, but he has a point. And this movie really was a movie about a villain who wins. Yeah, and that's like the thing that we never get to see. You know, growing up, it's, you ask yourself, how come no one ever makes a movie where the villain wins? Well, here it is. And I think for me too,
it's a very interesting concept.
Yeah, and I thought that it was amazing that Thanos was so well written too, just because his motivation, I felt like, really just made sense, because it was like an emotional trauma for him, and you know, it's really felt like he really doesn't see himself as doing something wrong, and that's what makes him so interesting, is because he truly believes that what he's doing is the right move. And of course, the heroes, in a way, are the antagonists of this movie, because they're trying to stop him from doing whatever he believes is going to improve the world, you know. And I just felt that Infinity War was really the culmination of the MCU. I know Endgame was the end, but Infinity War really just felt like everything led up to this, because for me at least, seeing how everyone fails and seeing how everyone falls before you finally get your resolution is a lot more, I guess, interesting, and is a lot more fun to watch than just watching the end. Because, oh man, I mean, yeah, I could talk about Infinity War for hours, but
yeah,
all I'll say is, yeah, it's, for me, it's a 10 out of 10, and I think that script and the way that movie is done, at least for me, deserves to be a lot more recognized than maybe a movie like Black Panther, where I didn't agree, you know, that it got nominated for Best Picture. Like, I love Black Panther, obviously, but I felt like if there was going to be a script, at least, that should have been nominated for Best Picture, it should have been Infinity War.
Yeah, for sure. So my number 1 is Avengers Endgame. This is a lot of people's number 1, but I think for good reason, in my opinion. I think not only is it the best MCU film, I'd say it's the greatest comic book movie of all time. And a lot of that goes into, you know, the main what is the word? The main complaint with this movie is that it's a little too slow in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that complaint. It is slow. I think it's slow in the beginning. The first 2 acts, honestly, are pretty slow.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that they're slow in a bad way. I really like the character-driven moments. And, of course, the third act, maybe the best third act we've ever gotten in a movie. It's definitely up there. For me, it is the best. But that third act is so emotional for you, and just such a it's so raw. Like it not raw, but it brings out emotions that for me, I didn't know that I could feel so much in a movie. When everyone comes back, I mean, chills. I'll still cry whenever they come back through the portals. I've seen this movie 5 times in theaters. I cried every single time. I cried in the credits of this movie when the original 6 names showed up for the original 6 Avengers. When their names showed up in the credits, I started crying because they each got their own screen. I didn't know I cared so much about the MCU and about these characters until this movie, and it brought so much out of me that I didn't know I had. And I don't think it would have brought that out of me if it didn't have the slow, character-driven first and second act. I think because of the beginning of this movie, because of the way it builds up, and because of the way you really see the effects that the snap had on all these characters who survived, because you see everything, like how much of a toll it's taken on them, it's very rewarding in the third act. And it makes that third act great for me, because you know how much they went through, and you know just how important it is, and you know how huge the stakes are. So yeah, I could talk about this movie forever, but I love it. I think a thing I like to say about this movie is it has no right, and I could say the same about Infinity War. With Infinity War, perhaps even had more to accomplish, but I'd say this movie has no right being as good as it is, given how many things it had to accomplish, because there's just so many things you have to wrap up in a movie like Endgame. And then with Infinity War, there's so many characters you have to bring in, because in Infinity War, all the characters are alive, so you have all these threads and all these characters that you have to work with. And both of those movies are so much better than they should be on paper,
Oh yeah.
When you think about the achievement that they were going for with both of those movies, it's near impossible to attain.
Yeah, it's like that's a lot that you could potentially mess up.
Yeah, it's such a feat. That's all I can say about it. It's a really just a grand feat. So, that being said, this has been our rankings on the entire MCU. Sorry, we went a little bit over time. This has been a bit of a long episode, but thank you for listening. Thank you for listening the whole time if you did. If you want to follow us on Twitter, my name is Preston C. Moore, and Raymond is at Rvinyah, RVINYAH on Twitter. We also work a website called The Cinema Spot. You can reach that at thecinemaspot.com or at The Cinema Spot on Twitter. Final thoughts on this episode, Raymond, before we close?
Man, don't sleep on Spider-Man Far From Home like Preston here. I promise you, it is at least the 9th best movie in this franchise.
I'll say it's at least the 18th best movie in this franchise, and I hope that you like it more than I did if you're listening, if you haven't seen it yet. So go see Spider-Man Far From Home. Next week, we are going to be talking about The Lion King and maybe some other news that comes out. But The Lion King is the big release next week. It is my most anticipated movie of the year, including Endgame, Rise of Skywalker, Toy Story 4, Frozen 2, all these other massive Disney movies. Lion hyped. King's my number one. I'm the most hyped for this movie. I bought tickets the day they dropped. So excited. That's what we're going to be talking about next week. So make sure you tune in next Monday. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as YouTube. If you've listened and you like this, make sure that you leave us a like, a heart, a 5-star rating, whatever quantifies as a like on whatever service you're listening on. That really helps us out, and we appreciate your reviews. Thank you guys for listening. We hope to see you next week when we talk about The Lion King.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out and listening. See you next week.
See you then.